Hey, my name is Matthew Ryan, Aussie author of the time travel series Till Time, and you're listening to There's a Time and a Place for That. In the last episode, we arrived in ancient Rome, the capital of one of the greatest empires in history, and explored the western side of the city. We visited Hadrian's Mausoleum, the Grand Pantheon, and the mighty Capitoline Hill, home to the temple of Ultramax Capitolus Jupiter. We wandered through the Imperial forums of the Central Valley, where the people spend their days shopping, eating, working, and socializing in these grand squares around their magnificent temples. Now we are turning our eyes south towards the Palatine Hill and east towards busy neighborhoods beyond Rome's most recognizable monument. There is still much of the city to see, so, as the Emperor Marcus Aurelius might say, let us waste no more time wondering what a good tourist should be. Let's be one. This is There's a Time and a Place for That, Episode 2, The Eternal City, Part 2. Leave the Temple of Peace via the southern entrance and come upon a street separating the Basilica Aemilia from a temple, while further ahead, an intriguing round building calls us forward. We've come a ways east by passing through all of those forums, and now the murmur of conversation and discussion is being overcome by distant cheers and shouts. This is not the triumphant parade of Lucius Verus we came upon earlier, but it is somewhat related. For now, though, we should see to this cylindrical structure. It is an important one. Just as the living room with its television is the heart of the modern home, in ancient times the hearth served this purpose, and this is the hearth of Rome itself. As we approach, we can see that the 20 columns that ring the entire structure are separated by elegant latticework that allows a peek at the shrine within. This is the Temple of Vesta, goddess of the home and hearth. It is about 15 meters wide, with a high base and wide steps leading up to the entrance. Within the shrine burns the sacred flame of Rome, one which can never be allowed to go out. It is tended to by 6 women, called the Vestal Virgins, who were chosen at a young age for a 30-year-long tenure. These priestesses live in the building beside it, a large 3-story villa made from brick with an open courtyard containing a garden and a pool. This house is well appointed, allowing the priestesses to live in comfort and dignity, with baths, kitchens, and private bedrooms. Statues of previous Vestal Virgins line the portico of the house, though outsiders are forbidden from entering either the house or the temple. The priestesses are afforded some of the highest dignities in all of Rome, being attended to by servants and guards, given the best seats in arenas and circuses, and even possessing the power to pardon any convicted criminal simply by placing a hand on them. However, should the priestesses allow the sacred flame in the shrine to go out, or if they are found to have broken their vow of chastity, the offending woman is buried alive in a room outside the bounds of the city. Nearby, in the western direction of the Roman Forum, the street is split in two by a fairly simple temple, that of the deified Julius Caesar. After his death, his adopted son, Augustus, the first proper emperor, declared that Caesar had ascended to the house of the gods, joining them in divine immortality. The red brick temple, fronted by a portico of marble Corinthian columns, marks the place where Caesar's body was cremated following his assassination. A shrine was set up here shortly after Caesar's funeral, but the temple itself wasn't built and dedicated for 15 years after his death, after which Augustus added a 3-arch triumphal monument to the side of it. This arch, which we have just passed under, is made with 3 rectangular structures, the center one being the tallest, and is built from volcanic stone dressed in bright marble. The top of the centerpiece is inscribed with details of the honours bestowed upon Augustus under a bronze quadriga statue, below which is the only curved archway of the monument. The outer two vaults are instead built in the form of a pediment, with a triangular relief above a rectangular arch. Imagery depicts the triple victories of Augustus in Croatia, Greece, and finally Egypt, all of which secured his position as the sole ruler of Rome. For our final stop in our tour of the city centre, we will again head east, passing back through Augustus's arch and around the wide marble fountain just beyond it. We wander the length of the House of the Vestal Virgins, and the distant cheering becomes louder. Up ahead, the only building we can see is a temple larger than even the one dedicated to Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. The building stands on a platform 10 metres off the ground, 145 metres in length and 100 in width. Freestanding porticos made from Corinthian columns supporting a narrow pediment roof run down both of the long sides. Between them, in the centre of the platform, stands a temple, 30 metres tall, 110 long, and 53 wide. A double flight of stairs allows access from each corner of the platform, leading up to the wide stairs before the massive marble columns that ring the temple. We ascend these stairs, passing golden statues standing guard at the front of the platform, and crane our necks back to see the enormous female statue standing in gold at the very top of the temple's pediment. Each of the 10 columns topped with elegant red granite that hold the pediment up are wide enough that a person could lie down behind one and be hidden from view. Entering through the towering doors, we come to a room only half the length of the entire temple. This is the altar room for Roma, the patron goddess of the city itself, and it contains many glittering treasures donated to gain some divine favour. Her cult statue shows her in a similar form to Minerva and Athena, with a helmet perched atop her head, a spear in her left hand, a shield resting beside her throne, and an idol of victory standing in the palm of her right hand. A small door at the back wall leads discreetly into a near-identical space. However, in this room, we find the other half of the temple of Venus and Roma, Venus Felix, or Venus of Good Fortune. In contrast to the militant representation of Roma, Venus is instead standing, a cloak covering her lower half, while her upper body is on full display. The two altars were designed symmetrically. Even their attributes, in Venus's case the Latin word for love, amor, A-M-O-R, fit together. It is here that engaged couples make offerings to Venus for fortune in marriage, and they are watched over by the Imperial couple themselves, silver statues of Marcus Aurelius and his wife, Faustina, plank Venus. As we leave behind these sites of divine worship, we exit through a doorway identical to the one on the forum side, and come face to face with a site of less divine worship. Across a wide square is a building larger than anything we have seen thus far, with a wall rising 48 metres into the air, punctuated by 3 levels of statue-filled arches, and topped by a solid layer supporting tall wooden masts. This circular building is perhaps the most recognisable aspect of Rome. Built 85 years ago, the Flavian Amphitheatre, known in our day as the Colosseum, is an iconic structure. The oval arena is 189 metres long and 156 metres wide, at least on the outside, and is well known as the hosting ground for gladiatorial battles and painful executions by ravenous beasts. In fact, a steady flow of people are trickling towards it. Perhaps the triumphant return of Lucius Verus has prompted his father to host some games today. As we join the crowds, we pass by 2 smaller monuments in the square. One is perhaps uncomfortably close to the entrance of Venus's temple. Standing on an 8-metre tall marble pedestal is a 30-metre tall statue of gilded bronze, representing the entirely naked figure of Sol, god of the sun. This colossus, from which the arena takes its modern name, was originally modelled after the mad Emperor Nero, but following his death, it was amended to portray someone more divine. To our right, a little further into the square, is a wide fountain crowned by a 20-metre tall piece of conical marble. It is named the Meta Sudans for the metae, or turning posts, of the racetrack in the Circus Maximus which it resembles, and the water appears to seep from the marble surface itself. As we come up to the base of the Colosseum's wall, we can make out more detail in the columns and arches built into it. The upper two arches display statues of various gods and heroes, mainly militant ones, surrounded by columns of the Corinthian style on the third level and Ionic on the second, which differs from Corinthian by having simple scrolling tops rather than the fancier leaf patterns. The ground floor arches are entrances, each numbered 1 through 80, and are bordered by Doric columns, which have much simpler, rounded tops and no carved decoration. As we join a line, we see people look over with interest at two women walking from the direction of the forum. They are both clad in simple dresses, their heads covered for modesty. One is no more than 15, while the other looks to be about 30. These are two of the Vestal Virgins, and they are heading over to one of 4 entrances to the Colosseum that the vast majority of people will never pass through. These entrances are reserved for the Emperor, his personal aides, family and guests, and the Vestal Virgins. Unfortunately, we will have to pass through one of the common entrances, and we must walk through a winding tunnel and up a few flights of stairs to reach our seats. As opposed to 21st century stadiums, the best seats are not up in boxes at the top of the grandstands. Noble visitors to the Colosseum are seated right down at the side of the arena, where they can see every detail of the fights held there. A special box at either end of the arena is kept for the Emperor's party and the Vestal Virgins, while the rest of the lower third of the seating is offered to the senatorial class of Rome. Nobles are seated in the middle group of seats, while common citizens, called plebeians, are placed in the higher seats. At the very top, just below the fabric awning pulled out over the seats to provide shade, is a gallery ringed by Doric columns. There are no benches here, but this space is offered to non-citizens from which they can watch the gory and glorious spectacle below. Of course, in Imperial Rome, non-citizens includes women and slaves as well as foreigners. We take our seats, roughly halfway up the stands thanks to our invitations to the city from the Imperial Court, and watch on as 2 pairs of gladiators step out into the arena to riotous applause. One has his head bared, while the rest all have oddly large helmets with visors, horsehair crests, and brims. The helmless gladiator wears only a loincloth and some armour over his left shoulder and arm, and is armed with a trident and a weighted net. He holds both up to the crowd as he strides across the sand. His companion has similar armour, though also wears gleaming greaves over the shins and knees and a tight-fitting, sleeveless tunic. A sword hangs from the hip, but the primary weapons are a spear and a small round shield in the style of Greek hoplites. These two are known as a retiarius and a hoplomachus, and they are paired up against a murmillo and a secutor. The murmillo, has only an arm guard and some short greaves, along with his beekeeper-like helmet. He carries a typical Roman short sword, called a gladius, along with a chest-high rectangular shield called a scutum. There is little difference between the murmillo and the secutor, except for their helmets. The secutor's has only 2 small eye holes and no crest, and for good reason. They have been especially chosen to complement their opponents. The 4 warriors turn to face one end of the arena, where a man in an elegant robe of white, purple, and gold stands waiting. With a golden wreath crown nestled in his curly brown hair, he is unmistakably Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, Emperor of Rome. The gladiators place one fist against their chests and shout, in unison, "Hail Caesar! Greetings from those about to die." The Emperor nods once, raises his hands, and brings them together with a clap that resounds around the Colosseum. The 2 pairs of gladiators walk away from one another as the crowd erupts into roars and cheers. and the battle begins. The Murmillo, symbolic of a Roman soldier, faces off against the Greek hoplite, representing the war 300 years ago that saw the downfall of Hellenic Greece to the military machine of Rome. They come close, and the Greek spear rakes off the Roman scutum, pulling back as the gladius swings at head height. These two gladiators are highly trained, perhaps more skilled than professional legionaries. For them, there is nothing in life but the fight, the cheer of the arena, the regular taste of blood in the mouth as they are hit. Their clashes become a dance as the spear jabs out from range, swinging to hit with the staff as the Murmillo avoids the point and gets in close to slash and cut with his blade at the smaller shield of the Hoplomachus. Meanwhile, away from these two glorious warriors, a different fight rages. The Retiarius is far more agile than his almost bullish secutor opponent. A vicious slash from a gladius meets nothing as the leaner fighter leaps to the side, jabbing out with his trident from midair before lashing out with the net, trying to ensnare his opponent. Now this is a dance. The crowd are unaware of it, but both warriors have trained for a fight exactly like this. It is their specialty. While the secutor appears to be wild and slow, and the Retiarius agile and arrogant as he mockingly turns his back to encourage the cheers of the crowd, their fight is practically choreographed. Either could finish this fight in a matter of moments if they wanted, but a short fight would not entertain the audience. From behind the Retiarius, the secutor charges and slashes with his sword, taking advantage of his opponent's momentary distraction. But the Retiarius ducks and spins, jabbing with his trident and catching the faceplate of the secutor's helmet. This is why they have only 2 tiny eye holes. If the Murmillo had taken 3 trident points to the helmet, they would have surely found passage through the many holes of the grille, ruining the face at the very least, maybe blinding or killing the gladiator at the worst. But for the secutor, it simply knocks him back in surprise. In a flash, the Retiarius throws his net, catching the secutor over the head and shoulders. The net bears lead weights along its edge, unbalancing the secutor and keeping him from retaliating. The Retiarius pulls him to his knees and thrusts the trident forward, but the secutor is not down yet. He twists, avoiding the trident's prongs and catching it in the crook of his shield arm. He slashes low with his sword, now that the Retiarius cannot move away, but his opponent jumps over the blade. A knee hits the secutor's chest, while the right hand, having dropped the trident, pulls a dagger from his belt. He jabs and flicks it free, drawing a streak of blood from the secutor's shoulder that pleases the crowd. With the net still in his left hand, he yanks it down, forcing the secutor into the sandy arena floor. He holds the dagger's tip against the back of the secutor's neck and looks up at his emperor, waiting for a verdict. Our eyes are drawn suddenly back to the first pair. Splinters fly as the Hoplomachus' spear is shattered just below the metal head. The Murmillo drives his opponent back, hacking and slashing at the round shield that manages to hold back the vicious onslaught long enough for the Hoplomachus to draw a short sword. Now, the 2 gladiators are back on equal terms. Swords clash, throwing sparks, then thud into shields before a shove separates them. But the Hoplomachus has a smaller shield than the Murmillo. The Roman gladius strikes against the Greek Siphos before changing direction and slashing downwards, parting the tunic and skin over the Hoplomachus' chest. The warrior stumbles back, blood staining the sand underfoot, but before the Murmillo can end the fight, 3 sharp tips plunge themselves into his thigh. As he bellows in pain, the Retiarius jumps back, getting out of reach as the Murmillo turns to slash. Now, with 2 on 1, this fight is over. The Hoplomachus lunges forth, smacking the rim of the round shield against the Murmillo's helmet and knocking him into the sand. The shield is discarded as the Hoplomachus drops to one knee, the Xiphos held in both hands as it plunges towards the gladiator's chest. It stops just as the point touches the skin, and the gladiator looks to the emperor. For the second time in as many minutes, Marcus Aurelius raises his hand and keeps his thumb tight against the side of his fist, indicating that the gladiator be spared. As the Hoplomachus straightens and, alongside the Retiarius, drinks in the thrilled cheers of the crowd, 6 medics dart out into the arena, heading to the dazed and wounded losers. While many in this arena would have liked to see them brought to a permanent end, gladiators are expensive to train, and it is far more sensible for these warriors to survive their battles. As the crowd nonetheless roars their approval, the Hoplomachus reaches up with their hand and pulls their helmet free, revealing long hair and a tough yet smooth teardrop-shaped face. The cheers become even wilder. While rare, female gladiators are not unknown, and to see one fight and win so well is a special treat. This Amazonian warrior walks beside the Retiarius as they head for the gates along the outer edge of the arena, following the medics and their 2 defeated opponents, bringing the fight to a close. But on a day like today, there will be further battles. The Colosseum is easily able to host up to 50 spectacles in a day, provided there are enough gladiators or wild animals to keep up with demand. However, there is more to see and do in Rome, and we should make our way out of the amphitheatre, back into the city streets to the south. Emerging from the arches surrounding this shrine to glorious combat, we find ourselves on the southwestern side of the arena. Ahead of us is the Palatine Hill, one of the 7 raised areas of Rome upon which the eponymous palatial residences of the Imperial family are built. As we walk along the base of its slope, passing down the side of the Temple of Venus and Roma that we visited previously, we will pass around the triumphant arch of Titus, whose interior depicts the destruction of Jerusalem. From beside it, a sloping pathway leads us up to the Palatine Hill, directly beside the Temple of Apollo. Built in a more unique style with widely spaced columns, gilded Corinthian capitals, and painted in red, yellow and green, this Greek-inspired temple is surrounded by a walled garden. Inside, the 3 cult statues of Apollo, his sister Diana, and their mother Latona are accompanied by the famed Sibylline books, a collection of prophecies written 2 centuries ago. Up ahead, however, we see a truly magnificent complex open up before us. A multi-level myriad of palaces, courtyards, gardens and hallways that act as the home of the emperor, his family and his court. Immediately before us is the palatial forecourt, which is perhaps 100 meters across and decorated in stately statuary and fountains. To our right lies the labyrinthine complex of the Domus Tiberiana, the palace built by Tiberius that currently serves as the personal residence for Lucius Verus. Directly ahead of us, however, is the Domus Augustana. It is separated into 3 sections. On the far eastern side, currently beyond our sight, is an enormous garden easily 150 meters in length. Next to it is the private residence of the emperor, which is fronted by a garden the size of an Olympic swimming pool, surrounded by columns and sheltered porticos, followed by an actual Olympic-sized pool with an artificial island and sculptures depicting scenes from Greek mythology, before, finally, the villa of the emperor centered on a courtyard. And, directly ahead of us, the Domus Flavia, which serves as the public wing of the palace. Unfortunately, we cannot go waltzing into the imperial bedrooms, but the Domus Flavia has plenty to awe us. The palace has a deep portico running the length of the western and northern sides, its columns made from a kind of marble with swirling bands of white and green. As we cross the 10-meter deep front porch, we can see the main audience hall through the enormous doors before us. With a ceiling rising 30 meters above our heads and decorated with inset squares reminiscent of the Pantheons, it certainly evokes the idea of imperial dignity and nobility. Columns of purple marble ring the room, creating 8 niches in total that house enormous sandstone statues of divine beings and are topped by elaborate marble friezes. Doors lead off to the left and right, heading into the barracks for the Praetorian Guards and the more private council chambers, respectively. Directly ahead, Upon a platform that is set into the southern wall is a large, stately throne. It is here that the emperor would receive guests, embassies, and petitions. On either side of the throne are doors leading through to the enormous garden that is the centerpiece of the palace. As we pass through it, we come to a courtyard surrounded by a porch bound by yellow marble columns. An entire sculpted frieze runs around the edge of the porch, just above these columns, but we are drawn out into the middle of the courtyard. As big as the audience hall, this 50-meter wide garden is primarily occupied by a pool with a central island. This island has a cluster of trees and bushes in the center, but the outer half of the width of this perfectly octagonal island is cut through by a maze of water channels. Somewhere in the center, a discreet fountain is pushing water into this labyrinth, causing everything to flow outwards into the pool. The rest of this open garden space is taken up by immaculately maintained bushes and flower beds. Violets, blue hyacinths, sunny marigolds, blood-red roses, star-shaped narcissus, fragrant saffron, pleasant chamomile, lovely chrysanthemums, and curving lilies, interspersed with golden cassia, aromatic cypress, magenta-coloured oleander, bright lemon, fruitful pomegranate, and ever-present olive trees. We wander through the garden for a bit before reaching the rearmost room of the palace. This one is also the largest. Used to serve banquets to guests of the emperor, it is flanked by two courtyard gardens centered on large, tiered, oval fountains surrounded by yellow marble columns. The banquet hall itself is extravagantly decorated, with marbles of various colors decorating the walls, floors, and ceiling, with high-set windows above a carefully gilded frieze and 3 arcades of columns along the sides. Tables surrounded by lounges fill the space, where elite members of Roman society and foreign dignitaries would be treated to several courses of food and wine, feasting on olives, bread, honey, cheese, and pastries. Little birds, deer kidney, pork belly, capons, fried lamprey, sausages, and fresh salads. And afterwards, delightfully sweet treats made from fruit, honey, and pastry. Already, slaves are preparing the space for tonight's banquet, held in honor of Lucius's return from the east. A door exits out at the far end, leading into an open space that runs along the wall of the emperor's private palace. As we follow it, a familiar sound reaches our ears. Cheering. Up ahead, the hill appears to end, the spacious city blocks of the Palatine Hill taking its place in the distance. As we reach the top of the slope, we come to a shaded platform that extends out to give a stellar view of the Circus Maximus. As we look out over this racetrack, again, there are no clowns nor acrobats here. The most noticeable feature is its staggering size, 621 meters long and 118 meters wide. Small by 21st century racetrack standards, but for ancient 4-horse chariots, it is perfect. We can see a race currently occurring. 8 chariots are hurtling anti-clockwise around the central barrier, while the shattered wreckage of one is already visible directly below us. Crowds of fans are cheering as these chariots violently jockey for position. Much like Formula 1, there is a racing line that provides chariot drivers with the quickest path around the track. Too far out and it takes longer to complete a lap, too close to the shrine-covered central barrier, and they run the risk of being unable to turn quickly at either end of the track, or even crash into the barrier itself. Drivers are encouraged to ram their opponents into the raised stone center to entirely destroy the chariots, unlike in Formula 1, where a car is rendered undrivable if lightly bumped into, and such collisions are penalized. If we look closely, we can see that the drivers and chariots have different colors on them: white, red, green, and blue. These are the teams to which the chariots belong to. The teams have sponsors, as in modern racing, and as many as 3 chariots could be entered into a race per team. Green has 3, as did blue until one of them crashed into the outer wall, while red has 2 and white only the 1. As the two leaders, a green and a white, drive below where we stand, we can see that the reins are actually looped around the driver's waist, allowing them to steer by leaning and leaving their hands free to use a whip on the horses and their competitors. Should they crash, however, this will keep them attached to the horses, risking serious injury if the horses continue galloping. Each driver is therefore equipped with helmets and a blade with which they can cut the reins and free themselves. As we watch this thrilling, dangerous sport, we can see that it will soon come to a close. Along the central barrier, amidst the shrines dedicated to various gods of horses, grain, and the sun, there are 7 fountains built in the form of a dolphin. These little monuments, based on the swiftest animal known to Romans and a favourite of the sea and horse god Neptune, would be turned on each time the lead chariot completed a lap. As the white and green drivers in lead positions pass the gates at the western end, the 6th fountain springs to life, indicating that they are on their final lap. They hurtle towards the large marble arch at the eastern end, once dedicated to Emperor Titus, their chariot wheels scraping against one another, the white driver on the outside line from the green driver. We watch as they round the end post, the green driver having to slow to make the turn properly, and the white chariot pulls ahead just enough that he takes the lead. The roar of the crowd reaches a crescendo as the only white team chariot in the race crosses the finish line a split second before the leading green chariot, winning the race. The green team in particular are outraged, and as one of the most popular teams, their many fans look almost riotous. It's a bit like a modern football game. In the 6th century, fans just like this will riot across the city of Constantinople, nearly overthrowing the emperor himself and prompting massively violent retributions by the military. But today, the Greens seem content to just loudly voice their dissatisfaction from their seats. The white team and their charioteer seem incredibly excited as the driver pumps his fists from atop the chariot. It has been a while since their team has won a race, and with prize money of 40,000 sestertii, equal to about 20 grand today, he is right to be happy. We leave the Circus Maximus behind, returning through the extravagant residences on the Palatine Hill and exiting out onto the Via Sacra, the road that runs from the Forum to the Colosseum. As noon turns to afternoon, we find ourselves walking with the crowd as the people begin to head outwards from the forums, their working days just about done. Most Romans, at least those who could afford to, would nap in the afternoon before having supper at dusk. For those that lived well enough and worked decent jobs, their workday still ended early, and they would use the time before nightfall to work around the house or spend time with their family. As we walk amongst these people, dressed in various tunics and togas of a myriad of bright colours, we find ourselves heading north, around the Temple of Venus in Roma, and past the majestic Colosseum, towards the fingers of the hills rising to the northeast. Immediately to our right, up a slight slope, is the Temple of Tellus, a multi-storey building set within a very large courtyard. Here, we pass into the district of Carinae, one of the most wealthy neighbourhoods in Rome. In this suburb, we can find the houses of the famous political speaker Cicero and the powerful general Pompey the Great. These homes are set amongst vibrant gardens, with an open courtyard in the centre, elegant porches out front, and rooms dedicated to banquets and baths throughout. As we pass into Subura, a neighbourhood further north, the scene changes drastically. In this valley between 3 of the 7 hills of Rome, we find streets that have burnt and flooded many times in the past. Subura is home not to equites and senators, at least not this part of it, but rather the poorest folk of Rome, the plebeians and the non-citizens. Here we find many of the insulae that serve as ancient apartment blocks. These buildings appear to be poorly built, made from timber and brick rather than concrete to keep costs low, and they are not pretty to look at. One that we pass has a floor jutting out a few inches further than the one below. Occasionally, an insula will collapse without warning, and if a fire started somewhere nearby, they were guaranteed to be destroyed. If this happens at night, it will cause the deaths of at least a dozen people and leave many more homeless. However, the one on the corner of two intersecting streets is nicer to look at. Its clean angles and more careful construction are due to the presence of 3 tabernae on the ground floor. These small shops can be rented out to many different merchants. Here we can see a weaver's workshop beside a carpenter's, and around the corner, a pottery shop. Most insulae, as well as many single homes, have such shops set in their frontmost rooms. Businesses were typically staffed by individuals rather than large groups of people, and so it made sense for merchants to set up shop as close to home as possible. Continuing through the crowded streets of Subura, we see the side of Rome that has thus far evaded us. Far from being a city cleansed by a sophisticated sewer system, supplied by aqueducts, and run by vastly clever men in togas, Rome is still a city of antiquity. Many people are poor and sickly. We see here a number of people in patched tunics with rope for their belts, heading out in various directions looking for work. They will try their luck at the docks and at building sites, hoping for enough money to help feed their family. The government provides the people with monthly allotments of grain, but naturally this must be supplemented. Each apartment of the insulae houses a family of as many as a dozen people, and if the men of the family can find work doing odd jobs, then perhaps their children and siblings will have a taste of cheese or pork instead of the usual bread, veggie porridge, or fish. Assuming they survive the disease that is rampant in these damper parts of town. Germs aren't even remotely understood, and very soon a plague will decimate Rome, even claiming the life of co-emperor Lucius Verus. With the lowered sun peeking through breaks in buildings at our backs, we turn our wandering feet to the east. The Clivus Suburanus, the main street running through the busy neighbourhood behind us, leads us towards the Esquiline Hill, a place of scattered houses amongst vast gardens and bath complexes. On our right, upon the Oppian Hill, the vast baths of Trajan rise up from the roofs around. Over 300 metres in either direction, it is the largest complex we will find in Rome, encompassing an area bigger than the Imperial Palace or the Baths of Agrippa. A large open internal area, complete with a small semicircular amphitheatre, is used to host athletic competitions amongst flower beds and hedgerows. The baths themselves include saunas, swimming pools, and gymnasiums, all open to the public. We pass another public space to our right as we begin walking up the gentle slope leading to the Esquiline Hill. Surrounded by a double colonnade, the Porticus Livii was initially built by Augustus prior to his death and dedicated to his wife, Livia Drusilla. At 120 metres long and 95 metres wide, it is a sizable space with only a modest yet resplendent shrine in the centre. Around this shrine are some beautiful gardens and walking paths, with plenty of benches for people to meet up and chat. A fountain can be seen through the columns in each corner, cooling the space, and numerous frescoes and paintings line the walls between open archways. This little park is representative of the kind of emperor Augustus was, and it laid the foundations of the public works that became emblematic of the Roman Empire. Gone were the days of private displays of wealth. Now, philanthropy was the real measure of a wealthy citizen's status. It is for that reason that, as we reach the heights of the Esquiline Hill, we shall see many a garden and public bath amongst the near-rural neighbourhood. We reach the higher plane of the Esquiline, some 50 metres above the valley of the Forum, and see the dilapidated Servian wall not too far ahead. Between us and the city wall, the busy urban streets below have made way for more spacious properties belonging to well-off citizens, likely of the plebeian and equite classes. Here we find various townhouses and small villas, some multi-storey, with the occasional shop serving the fashionable tastes of the locals. As we walk among the vividly clothed citizens of this hill, we turn off the main road, heading east towards the Porta Esquiline Gate, and make our way northward. We can see a vibrant, almost palatial residence through the streets ahead. As we get closer, we can see that it is actually set atop the city wall itself. This section of the wall is shorter, though much wider, than the lengths to the west of the city centre, and a large amount of earth has been heaped up on either side of this mound to provide a flatter area that rises up above the houses on either side of the wall. The villa atop this earthwork is surrounded by some of the most vividly green gardens we have seen so far. We come up the path leading to these gardens, and the full extent of this place becomes apparent. Known as the Gardens of Maecenas, this was the third Roman property to emulate the beautiful style of Persian gardens starting from the 1st century BCE. By today, these and many more garden-set villas surround Rome with a ring of greenery. This one in particular belongs to Marcus Cornelius Fronto these days, the once consul of Rome and personal tutor to both Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus. As an elderly and respected politician with close personal ties to the emperors, we can be sure that he would have an honoured place at the banquet at the palace tonight. For the moment, however, Marcus has decided to open his gardens up to the public, along with a vast buffet to celebrate the successes of his young students. As we wander through the gardens, we can see the influence of those luxurious palaces of the Parthian realm. Under the watchful gaze of the aqueduct Marcia, a series of symmetrical and orderly plantings of trees line elegant pools featuring bright mosaics and delicate fountains. Raked gravel pathways trace their way through open sunshine, under vaulted arches, and among carefully trimmed topiaries. All throughout, bright white marble statues of fauns, satyrs, muses, nymphs, heroes, athletes, famed philosophers, and the goddesses Ceres and Venus can be seen standing before more painstakingly designed mosaics. The villa itself is a complex of dining halls, auditoriums, open courtyards, and private baths. While extravagant in scale, it is not unlike the other houses we have passed on our way out from the city centre. The sprawling gardens around us are a sign of a new era in Mediterranean and Near Eastern civilization. With the Eastern conquests of Alexander the Great 500 years ago, Greek culture became predominant in this half of the world as far as India, blending Indo-Iranian and European in a way that has persisted throughout much of the Roman Empire's history. While this sadly will not last in Europe, the blend of Roman, Greek, and Persian culture will become a major part of the Arabic world throughout the medieval period in centuries to come. As we walk towards the eastern wall of Fronto's elaborate gardens, we get a beautiful view of the Campus Esquilinus that sits at the top of the hill at the city limits. Beyond the Servian wall, the plateau serves as a neighbourhood for scattered villas and townhouses amongst blooming gardens, past which are various farms and orchards. Several aqueducts join together a few hundred metres ahead of us, their huge stone arches running along what will one day be the Aurelian walls, the new city limits of the Eternal City. Beyond that, the dusky gold and green of the Italian countryside stretches out endlessly, dotted with villages and villas, including the miniature city of Hadrian's Villa, 30 kilometres east of Rome, which is designed to replicate the empire as a whole. From our perch atop the earthen mound the gardens are built on, we can also see the tall walls of the Castra Praetoria to the northeast, the fortified barracks in which the emperor's personal elite bodyguards live and train. In time, this will become the site of several imperial coronations as the elite soldiers take on greater and greater influence in politics, eventually causing a state of civil war that will forever change Rome and Europe as a whole. But for now, as the sun sets over the city of Rome, everything is peaceful. Perhaps tomorrow we will once more wander the streets or even head out into the countryside ahead of us. But for now, since there are no streetlights in Rome, we had best find somewhere to rest. Our tour of ancient Rome is complete. that will do for episode 2. We'll return in 2 weeks' time to visit an entirely new city from a different period in episode 3. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration of the Eternal City. I truly hope you enjoyed our wander through these ancient streets. If you had fun visiting the mighty monuments of the Colosseum and the Palatine Hill and experiencing the lives of Roman citizens, you can give this podcast a like or share it on social media to help guide others to these tours of historical cities. And if you want, you can leave a comment to let me know what you particularly enjoyed hearing about or what other locations you'd like to tour in the future. Now, if you enjoyed exploring ancient Rome, you might also enjoy Till Time. This book series follows best friends Imogen and Ashton as they adventure through the past, just as we are doing. The Sultan's Siege, the first book of the series, recounts the discovery of their time-traveling abilities and their exciting fight to escape the war between Crusaders and Ayyubids and make it back home. The sequel, The Frankish Fille, follows their dive into Carolingian Francia and their quest alongside a royal assassin to end a plot that threatens to upturn European history. More books are on their way, but for now, you can find these first 2 installments on Apple Books, Google Books, Amazon Kindle, Kobo, and Barnes & Noble. Links to all of these can be found through the link tree in the description of this podcast. Thank you for listening to There's a Time and a Place for That, The Eternal City, Part 2, and I'll see you next time.